So one of the things that Nietzsche does with this idea of the will to power is he uses it to explain social change. And there's, just as a note, something to keep an eye on is that if if an idea explains everything, then perhaps it explains nothing. There is a sort of critical thought you should keep in mind about this will to power stuff, that maybe because it seems to explain everything, we think, well, is it really explanatory? It's a bit like if somebody says, looking at social change or looking at people's behaviour, and somebody says, oh, it's all about money. And you say, well, are you sure? And you point out altruistic behaviour and say, oh, well, yeah, but, and then there's some side explanation. Or it's all about making you feel good about yourself. And you point out that people sometimes do things which seem altruistic and say, oh, yeah, but they get a buzz out of it, right? It becomes clear that this is a closed system, right? So maybe there's some of that going on here. Anyway, Nietzsche appeals to this will to power stuff to explain social change. What do people want? They want to feel powerful. They want to try and increase their feeling of power. If possible, they want to increase power in fact. But if they can't do that, they will at least want to increase the feeling of power. How does that manifest itself in the genealogy? Well, it's part of Nietzsche's explanation for the introduction of the concept of sin. Why would anybody introduce the concept of sin? Right? It's not fun. It makes you responsible for your own suffering. Right? If you think about the slave revolt, so in the first essay, we've got the slave revolt in morality. We've got the idea that instead of the good-bad dichotomy that the nobles work with, instead we've got the evil-good dichotomy, right? And remember that the slaves have invented free will, so that the nobles can be held responsible for their bad behaviour, and instead of the bit about, well, if somebody behaves out of character or in a way that indicates bad character, if they're noble, they must be confused by a god or something, right? So we've got all that. But then Nietzsche wants to explain, and has to explain, a bit more. He has to explain why the concept of sin took off, because that is central to the kind of Judeo-Christian moral outlook that he thinks that we are sick with. Let me just signal ahead for a moment to something about Nietzsche's medical metaphors. He does say that the concept of conscience is a sickness, but a sickness like pregnancy, right? So bear that in mind whenever he raves about mankind being sick with the concept of conscience. Anyway, sin. Why do we want it? Why does this concept? Why is it introduced? And why does it stick around? Right. The reasons somebody might have for introducing a concept are all very well, but why does it gain traction? Why does it stick around? Well, says Nietzsche, because at least it gives us power over our own condition. It makes us responsible for our own suffering. Now, there's a slight awkwardness here because, of course, the religious concept of sin isn't just the kind of juridical sense that you commit individual sins in your life and therefore have to pay for them, because that concept of sin doesn't explain redemption, right? If you think of sin as individual misdemeanors that you commit in your life, then how can they be redeemed by the death of the man God Jesus 2,000 years before you were born? How does that work? That just looks like a miscarriage of justice. He's dying for your sins. In order for that whole religious picture to make sense, you need the idea of original sin. You need the idea that you are born in sin. But you didn't choose that. You didn't do that. So that's not your doing. That's not your responsibility. So it's not obvious how the concept of original sin can make you personally feel more powerful. Nevertheless, the concept of original sin does put us at the centre of the story. Why is the world the way it is? Well, in polytheism, the world is the way it is, full of woe and misery and death and whatnot, because the gods choose it. In the Judeo-Christian narrative, the world is the way it is, that there is death and suffering in the world because Adam and Eve disobeyed God, right? Because we are sinful. That Adam has to scratch a livelihood from the soil in the sweat of his brow. Eve brings forth children in sorrow because of their disobedience. So human beings are at the centre of the story of why the world is the way it is. And in that sense, our sufferings become meaningful. And in that somewhat extended or indirect sense, we are responsible for the way the world is, for the sorrows of the world. So, says Nietzsche, the concept of sin gives us some feeling of power, albeit indirect. A more contemporary way of thinking about this, or a contemporary example that may help to make sense of this, is conspiracy theories, right? Why do people believe preposterous conspiracy theories like, the QAnon stuff, or the anti-vax stuff, or any number of any other conspiracy theories that are floating about that you can find on the internet? Well, they give people a feeling of power. They give people a feeling of control, right? The the sensation we have is that the world is very frightening. It's full of changes and threats we don't understand. It's definitely full of powers, right? One thing that everybody agrees is that there are very powerful individuals, tech bro bosses like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and the tech bro daddy Bill Gates, but also very rich financial institutions and global rich powerful governments and global institutions, and they shape the world, and we don't have much to do with it, and our efforts to shape the environment in which we live by voting are mostly pretty feeble and perhaps entirely ineffectual. And one of the interesting things in Britain is that the effect of Brexit is that of the Brexit vote, not of the actual departure from the EU, but of the fact that the Brexit vote turned out the way it is that now almost everybody is a conspiracy theorist, because the positive Brexit vote seems to be largely motivated by an attempt to get back control, to seize back control from these shadowy conspiratorial powers that we don't have any control over. But the people who voted to stay in the EU now have a narrative in which our EU membership was stolen from us by who? Well, by shadowy, undemocratic forces that manipulated the referendum, that caused the referendum to be called in the first place, and manipulated the outcome. So we're all conspiracy theorists now, and that makes us feel Well, that makes us feel powerless unless you can convince yourself that you've broken the spell, that you've broken the code, that you can see the code through the appearances, that you understand what's really going on, that you have figured it out. And this is one of the clever things about QAnon, is that whoever it is gives their followers puzzles rather than just saying, look, it's like this. You get this breadcrumb trail of puzzles which you can then try and solve. And because you've figured it out, you've figured out the answers yourself, and it doesn't matter whether the answers are true, all you need is that aha feeling of, okay, now, yeah, I see. The jigsaw puzzle pieces fit. The veil is lifted. Aha! As long as you get that aha feeling, it really doesn't matter whether what feels like an insight really is an insight. All that really matters is the feeling of insight, right? Why? Because that's a feeling of rising power, and it's there to give you some relief from the feeling of powerlessness that made you go looking for conspiracy theories in the first place. Okay, so there is a contemporary illustration, as promised, of the will to power at work in human beings.